As a child, I was always curious of the mysterious places around where I lived in my rural small town in Nebraska. I loved hearing about scary stories and urban legends. Sitting around a campfire, just listening to stories, was one of my favorite pastimes. There was just something about listening to tales of serial killers, vengeful spirits, monsters, and demons that always filled me with excitement and joy. I laughed at the other camp students as they became scared by these stories and loved the thrills they gave me. I was always the first to sit down at a campfire during the summer nights to hear a campfire story. There was one story one night that was told to be true, and was the story that ignited my curiosity of my old campgrounds. The story told of a man who lived in the nearby woods in a small cabin and would kidnap kids from campsites and would murder them back in his cabin and use their bodies as furniture. But since the man was fairly terrible of keeping track of which trail led back to his home, he left behind a trail of teeth from the children he murdered to mark his path home. This story chilled nearly everyone present at the campfire, except for me. It filled me with excitement and curiosity that led me to want to seek out the old cabin of the campfire kidnapper. I started asking around the camp about the old cabin, but no one knew where it was. I asked the old counselor who told the story. He said it wasn't true and that he lied about it being true. As discouraged as I felt immediately after he said this to me, something about his tone and eye movement told me that it was real and that he was trying to hide the truth. I continued to ask around the camp, hoping that someone would be able to tell me more about the mysterious cabin out in the forest beyond where the camp was. After asking nearly everyone in the camp, I finally met a man by the name of Isaac Newell, who was one of the old camp counselors. He was able to confirm the truth of the cabin kidnapper and had more information on the story. All of the legends about the cabin kidnapper are true. There was once a man who lived in the woods who would kidnap kids from campsites and would murder them and use their bodies as furniture for his home. However, he left years ago and only left behind one lone chair that was made of skin and bone. This new realization of the story having been real filled me with a sense of dread. I only partly expected for the story to be real, but now that I knew it was, I had to know more. Is the cabin out there? The cabin is nearby, through one of the old trails into the forest. I can take you there tonight if you'd like. This offer felt like a dream come true for me, to finally see one of these stories that I loved hearing so much being brought to life. There weren't that many camp activities going on that night, so I agreed to his offer. I'd love to see it. Then it's settled. I'll take you there after sundown. I didn't realize how suspicious this offer seemed at the time, because my thoughts were clouded with the opportunity to see a real house of horrors. I made preparations for my hike to the cabin and set off with Isaac down the path. I held onto a flashlight so I could see my way down the trail behind Isaac. We walked on for 2 miles through an old dirt path down to the cabin. As I passed on by the trees and bushes, I noticed occasional teeth in the dirt as I followed Isaac. Each one of them shined like a misshapen white pearl in the dirt, some of them looking very old. We continued on until we arrived at the cabin entrance. Here it is. The old cabin of the campfire kidnapper. Isaac eagerly made his way up to the door and turned a key inside the doorknob. But as the door opened slowly, I saw a bright light emanating from within the cabin. Isaac opened the door and revealed the interior of the cabin. The place was well renovated, with a fire in the back and the furniture was in clear view. In the center of a skin rug was a human skin table. In the back was a large human chair, and 2 drinks and a blade were clearly visible on top of the table. At the back, above the fireplace, was a portrait of a younger man that resembled Isaac. I became overcome with terror. What is this, Mr. Newell? You've finally been able to see the cabin. Surely you'd love to stay and join my company, wouldn't you? I didn't bother to answer his question and began to run at full speed back towards the camp, sprinting away from Isaac as quickly as I could. I heard him slowly gaining on me, his steps closing in. I began to throw branches and rocks behind me to slow him down, but it did little good. I could feel his hand reaching for me when he tripped over a hole and fell along the path. I continued running, not bothering to look back. I made my way back to my cabin and raced inside. I locked the door and began to barricade it. Isaac began to bang on the door, staring in with hungry eyes at me, looking at me as if I was a defenseless animal that he wanted to slaughter. After the banging alerted the other counselors, he backed off and made up some excuse as to why he was banging on my cabin door. Fortunately enough for me, I was able to leave the next day and never went back to that camp. My views on urban legends and fictional tales changed forever. Isaac was never caught, and from what I heard from some of my friends, more kids went missing at that camp. I learned that night that having a bit of caution when exploring the stranger things in the world is probably helpful, and that now every story is made up just to scare someone. I'm looking forward to my little brother heading off to camp soon and me being able to be a camp counselor. I'll be able to watch over him and make sure he's okay. I now have a scary story to tell him and all of his friends. I'll make sure to tell the entire story and to warn them of the cabin. To whoever may read this note, never tread down the trail of teeth.
Hi, I'm Betty Sue, homemaker to you. I'll make you some coffee, get you some food. Do everything a good housewife will do. I'll say please, do everything you need. All I want to do is please my husband true. Yes, that's what a good wife should do. He'll go out with the boys, come home late at night, smelling of alcohol and, dare I say, another woman's scent. Oh, you look so spent. Poor soul, your life must be so hard. Working all day, playing with those you wish to play. No worries though, I just want you to know, like Jekyll and Hyde, I have another side. Once I'm sick of you, Betty Sue homemaker goes away. Wink. Then the real me comes out to play. Just call me the homicidal housewife. You're all passed out, I have a knife. I wake you so you don't fuck with me. I cut off your genitals. You let out a scream. The woman you know, I do what any good wife would do. I cauterize the wound. You pass out from shock. When you awake, I have you bound and tied. I cooked you up a wonderful treat. I make you eat your manhood, a smile on my face. Then I murder and bury you. On to husband number 2. This guy, he was so sweet, doing everything he could do to please me. Months we spent in love with one another. He proposes and I say yes. A good housewife wants to please her man. Oh, and please him I did. Our marriage went on for a year or 2. Things were perfect. He loved me so true. There was just one problem. In bed, I found him lacking. So Betty Sue Homemaker grew tired of this. Out comes the homicidal housewife, getting him into bed, giving him perfect head, riding him perfectly too. Oh, the things I want to do to you! So I tie you up under the guise of trying something new. I then take my knife to you. I cut you up and stab and watch you bleed, all while fucking you violently. Your screams are pure ecstasy. I thank you kindly. Post-mortem, as I'm disposing of your body, all covered in your blood, I come. Would you look at that? Oh my, it seems you finally pleased me, I say to the remaining pieces of your body. Oh well, next husband please. This drew all sorts of attention. I was arrested, taken to court. I found my next husband there. With a wink, a cute smile indeed, I played the jury so exquisitely. They found me not guilty. I had my way with the prosecuting attorney. In the bathroom, all nice and dirty, we played and he eventually became husband number 3. Our marriage was perfect. So was the sex. Unfortunately, he was also married to work, aimed to be the greatest prosecuting attorney Black Winter would ever see. Instead, the headline read, "Prosecuting attorney lost his head. In a shocking accident, the world saw the perfect wife." Little did they know Betty Sue Homemaker had another side. I'm the homicidal housewife. 1 second I'm a good soul, next you are dead. I'm the homicidal housewife. Playing Betty Sue Homemaker, I aim to please before killing you with glee. No one ever truly suspecting me. I'm the homicidal housewife. Would you be my next husband, please? Wink.
A dream come true for many people buying their first home, and Frank was no different. With one tiny little difference, he was indeed Frankenstein. But since he literally didn't want to be associated with the bloody history of Frankenstein, he broke up the name so he could have some sort of regular life. Another exception, he also looked just as you would expect Frankenstein to look. 8 foot tall, weird hairline, greenish skin, metal bolts on his neck. He wore a lot of scarves, and his stiff joints didn't help him make friends either, as it gave his walk a peculiar wobble. Finally, he could move into what seemed to be a picturesque neighborhood with kids playing and barbecues. Normal, Frank sighed as he thought to himself, this is what it must feel like. After a few days, Frank settled in what he had expected, what he had seen on every movie and TV show he had ever watched. The welcome wagon. You know, those people who seem overly aggressively kind and nosy. They bring you pie and spy on your house. Those people. But they never came. Not one damn nosy neighbor or basket of crappy muffins. Nothing. Frank created a daily routine which was pretty boring as he worked from home and he didn't know the area. He considered going for a walk, but when he took out his garbage, a group of kids that had been outside riding bikes and playing stopped what they were doing, screaming in terror, pointed at him, and ran away. So staying close to home was the only wise choice. Frank had even decided to go out one night for a drive, trying to enjoy some scenery without being harassed. But when he came home, his house had been egged and covered in toilet paper. After a month of his dream of home ownership and friendly neighbors had been crushed, he heard a knock on the door. Thinking it was some kids being jerks, he hesitantly approached the door and looked through the side window that lined his front door. A smiling man in a short-sleeved button-up plaid shirt waved through the glass and said, hello. Hi, yes, my name is Tom. I live 2 doors down and wanted to introduce myself. Is this a bad time? Frank just stared at this kind soul on his doorstep and wondered if this was just a cruel joke. Nevertheless, he opened the door and was met with Tom's outreached hand, and the man says, I realized I hadn't come over to say hi and see how you were settling in. The man's hand just waiting in the air for a responding handshake. Frank gripped the man's hand and the man was on his knees in seconds. "Oh, sorry," Frank says. "I always forget my own strength." He releases the man's hand and he helps him back to his feet. Frank steps aside to welcome the man into his home, shows him to the sitting area and retrieves a cold drink for the both of them. As Frank returns to the sitting area, he hears what sounds like eggs hitting his house. He slowly walks to the window to see if he can see anything or anyone, but there is no one in sight. He continues to stare to the window for a moment, depressed. He sighs. After a moment, Tom says to him, "You know, Frank, maybe we could have a neighborhood meeting here and just politely bring this up and just explain to everyone that all those stories are just stories and they aren't true. Then all these crazy rumors can stop and so will all this harassment." Frank turns away from the window slowly and looks Tom dead in the eyes and says, "Oh, those stories and rumors? Yeah." He takes a sip of his drink and a menacing grin takes over his face as he says, "Yeah, they're all true."
I'm gonna just say this right away, that I have no answers for anyone. I don't know what happened to me. I'm still having trouble accepting that it did indeed take place. There's evidence of it happening with marks all over my body, and the clear vivid memory of the events. But alas, this is what went on at a place apparently called the Fun House. I woke up in a room, lit by nothing but moonlight spilling inside through the windows. I was sprawled out on the hardwood floor of what looked like a living room. When I woke up, I was flat on my stomach, and upon lifting my head to observe my surroundings, I noticed a thick, palpable layer of dust on the floor, and in turn on the side of my face. I stood up, finding myself to be barefoot. I was in the middle of a set of dust-covered furniture. One long couch, a love seat, and a big chair with an ottoman, all fixated to make the as-of-now fireplace the center of attention. This house was literally what nightmares were made of. The furniture was all dated at least 60-70 years, as were the black and white and sepia-toned pictures that lined the walls. Every movement created a seemingly amplified creaking sound that filled the entire house. The air inside the abode was damp and heavy, and it made me feel like gravity was working overtime. I looked down at my clothes and saw that they were tattered and torn, with dirt spots all over them, as if I had been rolling around or dragged all over the ground before ending up in the spot I woke up. I tried to remember where I'd been before I woke up in this house, and my mind was covered by a sheet of heavy, wet, figurative fog. The last thing that I could remember was being at work. Not leaving work, not getting home from work, but actually being at work, on my computer. After that, my memory dropped off into a ravine of nothingness. I chose not to dwell on it at this time, and located the front door. As I took my first step, the space throughout the house was permeated by a low-volume rendition of that classical carnival song, Entrance of the Gladiators. This filled my body to the brim with fear. The hairs on top of the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I instantly broke into a cold sweat. After that first step, I found myself frozen, unable to move due to the haunting music that I just knew surely preceded something equally as horrifying. As the song played on, and nothing popped out of the dark corners, I continued to the front door. Once I made it, I unlocked the row of locks that lined the left side of the door. I pulled it open and found myself face to face with a brick wall. I pushed against it. It didn't even budge. Even though I knew I wasn't connected to anything else, I didn't go beyond the door, as evidenced by the small triangular windows on each side of the door, through which I could see into the foggy night. Its structural integrity was quite sound. I closed the door and planned to go to a regular-sized window. That is, until I realized that every window had bars on it. I was trapped inside this house. As I tried to think of a way to escape, I heard a creaking from the floor above me. The carnival music ended, so that the sounds of the creaks that approached the stairs, adjacent to the door, is the only thing that I could hear, save for my heavy breathing and heartbeat. I quickly hid behind a large chair in the living room and awaited what was about to come into my view. The first thing I saw, past the wall, was a set of legs. Not one after the other, but at the same time, like whoever it was had hopped down the next step. Next, I saw the rest of the figure's body come down backwards, clearing about 3 steps. The figure repeated this process, descending down the stairs like some deranged form of human slinky. In fact, as the flexible being reached the landing of the stairs, he struck a pose, his spandex leotard proudly showing the name Elmer the Human Slinky. As he walked into the living room, it was like he was doing squats, lowering the top half of his body nearly to the ground before bouncing up and taking another step. He bounced into the living room, and when the light shone on his face, it revealed a terrifying visage. His eyes were wide, almost like he had no eyelids. He had a smile on his face, which put a display on the set of black and rotting teeth. He seemed to look around for something, presumably me, then proceeded to go by the chair and into the kitchen. Then I heard a door open, and heard him descend another set of stairs. I'm guessing to the basement. I didn't want to walk around, because even while barefoot, I knew that no matter how lightly I stepped, I would be heard. But I couldn't just stay there behind the chair forever. I looked to my left for some sort of weapon. Nothing. When I turned my head to the right, I was met with the knees of someone. I looked up. It was a clown. My heart dropped into my stomach as I tried to yell out, but to no avail. I basically backwards crab walked away from the horrible-looking entertainer, who started juggling. He had runny white makeup on his face, and a red nose that looked like it had been used for a chew toy for a dog. His clown outfit was tattered and ripped, and much dirtier than mine. I got up and ran as he started laughing a horrible, guttural clown laugh that chilled me to my very core. I ran across the living room past the stairs, and into the dining room. I shouldn't have. In the room was a large table that seemed to be only illuminated once I walked in. Seated around the table were 8 children, all dressed identically. Boys with the same haircuts, and the girls with the same haircuts. When I set foot into the room, they turned to me and smiled. There was one empty seat at the end of the table. In practically the blink of an eye, all the children were pointing at the empty seat, presumably wanting me to sit there. Yeah, no. I ran up the stairs and into the hallway with no lights. I was swallowed by the darkness. I felt my way down the hallway until I felt a doorframe. I found the handle and turned it, letting myself into a room that was filled with nothing but mirrors. I was going to turn around and leave before even stepping foot in, but was pushed in from behind, with the door slamming closed behind him. This room was small, but it had mirrors from the floor to the ceiling, including the back of the door. I was immediately disorientated. I walked through a small path I noticed, and basically said fuck it. I kicked the mirror in front of me at the time, and it shattered. I kicked through another, and another. After what seemed like I had broken enough mirrors to have bad luck for the rest of my life, the room was more or less open, save for the frames of the mirrors. To my right was a door with a mirror on it, and I went to try it. And I went to it, only to find it locked. I looked around the room, and there was a small square cut out of the wall with a tunnel. Deciding it was my only way to go, I crawled, and much to my extreme terror, it was filled with hundreds, perhaps thousands, of spiders and centipedes. I could feel them crushing beneath my hands and knees as I hurriedly scuffled my way through the narrow passage, being sure to keep my mouth and eyes shut. I felt them crawling on my sleeves and my shirt, and up the legs of my pants, adding a tickle to the already unbearable event. I finally made it to another wall, which I punched through in my attempts to get out of that insect and infected burrow. I emerged through the wall in another room and immediately stood up and shook myself off for what seemed like minutes, even going as far to take my clothes off and make sure they were void of any multi-legged mini monsters. Even so, that feeling of something crawling on me never left even to this day. It was when I got myself together that I noticed a closet. I really don't know what compelled me to check it, but I did. And inside, I found the hanging body of a man dressed in a worn-out business suit with holes where his eyes should have been. A rat scurried away out of the closet into the room, followed by some friends of his. I immediately turned and went for the door to the room. Thankfully, this time it was open. I returned to the hallway and looked to my left, seeing the third and last door before one at the very end of the hallway. I entered it, and it was a bathroom. When I say it was a bathroom, I don't mean a functioning one. The toilet was overflowing with feces and urine. The shower was coated with grime, in a layer with what I can only guess was blood pooled at the bottom. The sink was a mess of tangled hair, plugging up the drain, with some kind of black liquid staining the inside of the sink itself. I didn't even bother going in, as the smell was putrid and made me gag just from the initial whiff when I opened the door. I went to the final door at the end of the hall, and I slowly opened it, trying to peek and see what was inside. Before I could get a good look, I was pushed in from behind it once again. I fell flat on my face. I looked up to see the clown and the Slinky Man. The clown was standing there, pulling a long ribbon out of his sleeve, staring at me with malice intent. The Slinky Man was arch over backwards, doing a crab walk for a few paces, then turning around and going back. I stood there frozen for what seemed like an eternity before I noticed a hole in the floor, in the corner adjacent to the two horrifying beings. There was a ladder. I knew that that was my only way out of this room. I didn't hesitate. I took about 3 steps and I was there. I dropped down to a seated position with my legs down the shaft and found footing on the ladder. I sent the rest of my body down, and just before my head cleared the crest, I saw the 2 crazy-looking entertainers with angry looks on their faces coming towards me. The clown pulled the final ribbon from his sleeve and had a blade tied to the end of it. I crawled down the ladder and looked up. I saw 4 hands reaching down after me. Then, a piece of wood was slid over the opening, and I could hear a drill securing it to the floor. Down I went for quite a long time, until I reached the floor. I must have been in the basement. The floor was concrete. I still couldn't see, because the opening of the rest of the area was about 3 feet off the ground. I had to uncomfortably fit myself under, and I finally saw where I was. It looked like a butcher shop. Blood stained basically every surface. There were tables with cleavers and knives, all sizes lined up, filthy as they could possibly have been. Lucky I saw no meat of any kind. I made my way through the clear, blood-stained sheeting that acted as walls, and found myself in what looked like a bedroom. When I say looked like, I meant there was a bed and a dresser in there. Inside was an area only enclosed by clear sheeting. On the bed was a woman with a blindfold, striking a different sexually influenced pose every few seconds. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, so I creeped my way by on the floor. Once I was past the bed, I looked behind me, and the woman was on all fours on the bed. She then pounced. I used all my strength and kicked off the ground, sending myself flying forwards onto my stomach. The woman hit the floor and writhed in pain for a moment. I shuffled forward and made it past a clear sheet that hung from above. I took one last look behind me before the sheet met its original placement and saw the woman quickly crawling after me, but stopping at the sheet. Then she let out an exaggerated cry, like a baby throwing a tantrum. Blurred through the sheet, I could see her return to the bed and throw a fit. I stood up and continued into the darkness before me. I finally reached a turn where I saw moonlight shining through something. It was a window, with no bars. I sprinted towards it, and that's when I heard the carnival music once again. This only encouraged me to move faster. I punched out the window, cutting my hand in the process. I pulled away any glass that would cut me on my crawl out, and slid the top of my body through. Almost out, I felt a hand grab my ankle. I looked back, and the 8 children, the blindfolded woman, the clown, and the slinky man, and some weird, all-black unitard-wearing being I hadn't seen in the house were all at the window grabbing my legs, all moaning while the blindfolded woman wept loudly. I kicked furiously at the lot of them until I was able to slide the rest of the way out. I stood up and got away from the window. They all had their arms reaching through, moaning. As fast as I could, I ran until I saw a sign. "We hope you enjoyed your stay at the Fun House. You're welcome back anytime," with a creepy smiley face painted on the side of the message. I kept running and running and running until I saw something familiar. My car! I went to it to find it unlocked. My shoes and socks were on the passenger seat, the keys in the ignition, and there was this little post-it note on the steering wheel. "Happy birthday." My birthday wasn't for another 2 months. When I got home after like 3 hours of driving, I called each and every one of my friends, all of which they said they had no idea what I was talking about. I called the cops and took them to the location of the house. Much to my surprise, it was still there, unlike the Fun House sign I had passed. The police entered the premises and found nothing. Just an old, empty house that had been abandoned for quite some time, as evidenced by the thick layer of dust that coated everything. Everything. There were no footprints anywhere. The cops thought I was lying. I have no way to explain what happened, but I know it happened, because I still had the cut on my hand from punching the window, and bruised knees and elbows from crawling through that spider centipede tunnel. I don't think I'll ever know what happened that night. All I know is, I don't ever want to go back to the Fun House ever again.
Take 3 of the FrankenHam sandwich. Cam was told every day to not keep food in his room, especially stuff that should be thrown away. But many times his parents would find food and crackers and crumbs covered in slime. One night his father warned, after eyeballing the disgusting amount of garbage that he would feel ashamed to have. He saw a long sandwich, never eaten, but clearly too old to consume. "You know, you're playing a dangerous game with Ham." They laughed and went on with their lives, as things in Cam's room continued to grow and began to thrive. Cam would soon have an odd new surprise, for last week's ham sandwich was now alive! "Hang on! I forgot my backpack in my room!" Cam shouted as he rushed back into the house, up the stairs, and burst through the door to his bedroom. As soon as he did, he heard a scream. The scream was loud, but small, as if a small child with a deep voice yelled it. "Ah!" Cam stopped, startled by the sound that should not be coming from his room. He began to scan his room to investigate the sound and what would be making it. Passing it off as his imagination, he shook his head and reached for his backpack, and then turned to leave when he heard the voice again say, "Excuse me!" Cam stopped and looked around again. "Down here, kid!" Cam looked down and saw something that made him think he was either dreaming or that he should really stop eating so much sugar for breakfast. There, on his floor, amongst all the wrappers and papers and socks and shirts, was a sandwich. A sandwich from 2 weeks ago. He had forgotten all about it. The sandwich was now talking to him. Are you talking to me?" Cam said, pointing at himself. "Yeah, I'm talking to you! Why? You got another sandwich lying around here somewhere that I can stimulate my brain?" Cam waited and said, "No, you're a sandwich. You shouldn't be talking at all. And also, sarcastic." "Oh," said the sandwich. "Well, excuse me! Are you the expert, right? I mean, your room was the perfect environment for me to happen. I'm actually surprised this hasn't happened before. Or has it?" The sandwich just stares at Cam. "No," Cam says. "I have to go. I'm going to be late for school. Take me with you, the sandwich pleaded. What? Why? Cam asked. Because it's boring in here, and honestly, it smells. The sandwich was going on and on and on. Cam made a quick, rash decision and grabbed the sandwich to cram it in his bag. Ow! Be careful! Said the sandwich. I'm fragile, you know. Gosh, sorry. Cam apologized. Now shut up! Cam rushes and gets in the car. Not even 1 full minute into the ride, Cam hears, psst, psst. Oh my god, what? Cam whispered back loudly. Cam's dad chimes in. Everything okay back there, son? Did you see something? Yeah, sorry. Just thinking out loud, Dad. Just ignore me. Oh my god, what do you want? Cam asked the sandwich. Put me in the jacket pocket, kid. No way, Cam said. People will hear you and you smell. Look, kid, my whole life I wanted to see the world. Learn about new things. Please, please, kid, I'm begging you. The sandwich tried to form tears, but it wasn't happening. Your whole life? How long have you been in my room? Cam asked. And how do you have eyes and a mouth and arms, let alone hopes and dreams? And do I detect an accent? Cam questioned the sandwich. I'm a Boston ham. They nodded in understanding. Look, kid, I don't know how this all came about, but it did, and it looks like we're stuck with each other. Speak for yourself, Cam starts. I can just as easily toss you right out the window and be done with you right now. Cam starts to roll down his window very slowly, looking at the sandwich as the sandwich looks right back, neither saying a word. Cam glanced at the sandwich, then at his dad, making sure his dad really wasn't paying attention to what he was doing. And again, glanced at the sandwich, then back at his dad. The sandwich, suddenly suspicious, squinted at Cam and knew exactly what was going on. One more quick glance at his dad, then at the sandwich, then a sudden AH! The sandwich let out a blood-curdling scream. Cam's dad swerved and looked into the rear-view mirror confused. Sorry, Dad, poked my finger on a pencil, Cam explained, again squinting at the intelligent sandwich that was now leering back at him. He heard the whispering laugh from the sandwich. Thought you could just toss me out the window, eh? Forget about it. Now put me in your pocket. No, Cam whispered back at him. Dude, kid, do you think I'll be quiet in your locker? I'll be screaming Yankadoodle Dandy the whole time, screamed the sandwich. Fine, just be quiet, Cam stated as they approached the school. Cam mentally contemplated what was happening and decided that maybe he could pass this thing off as an experiment he created on purpose. But he wouldn't be able to know until the second hour of science. For now, all he had to do was get through English with this thing in his pocket. After that, everything would be just fine. English class was always annoying and seemed to last forever. This was because he sat by two girls, Jasmine and Candy, and all they did was talk about their hair, their clothes, their crushes, their lists of things and people they hated. They talked non-stop every class. They talked about these things so much he could have written a book about any of the one things they chose. How the teacher never heard any of this was beyond him. Franken Sandwich overheard these girls for a total of about 5 minutes and was having none of it. All of a sudden, hey, shut up! People in here are trying to learn. So you like a boy named Jackson? Jackson sat on the other side of the room, turned around. The sandwich then faced the red-faced boy. Hey, you like this girl over here? Jackson shrugged his shoulders and hesitantly said, I guess. There, said the frustrated sandwich. Mystery solved. Now, will you girls please be quiet? I'm trying to learn over here. Cam sat there as everyone stared at him. Jasmine's mouth hung open in embarrassment as her face crimson red. Sorry, everyone, Cam said. This was all just a joke. Just ignore me. Cam waited in agony for the bell to ring. Sat and waited for everyone else to leave. As he did, a burst of laughter came from his pocket. said the sandwich. No, it wasn't. You could have gotten my ass kicked, Cam warned. Look, if I did you a favor. Those girls will never jab on about this ridiculous trap again, and now everyone is going to be talking about this all day long. Whew! The sandwich said proudly. Cam grabbed his stuff and headed for science class. Yeah, who's going to be laughing when the science teacher gets his mitts on you? Cam said, threatening the sandwich. You wouldn't dare, you little punk. Oh, I would, screamed Cam. Just then the sandwich leaped from his pocket, yielding a teeny tiny little blade, and pointed at Cam. What the hell are you going to do with that? Pierce my ears? Cam laughed. Watch this, smartass! The sandwich then leaped at Cam right onto his face, sending Cam into a frenzy as he wailed in an attempt to free his face from the clutches of this crazy science experiment gone wrong that he never knew he had created. Then suddenly, until Cam lost his footing. They struggled until Cam lost his footing and fell onto the floor, hitting his head on the desk on his way down. Moaning in pain, he turned to see the sandwich slowly walking up his body with a crazed look he had only seen in movies. Cam? He felt shaking on his shoulder as he heard his name. Cam! Hey, buddy! He opened his eyes, continued in his groggy state. Cam, did you fall asleep? Dinner is almost ready, buddy, and you need to clean this room up before bed, okay? He sat up immediately, very graceful for the realization it was all a dream. Yeah, Mom, I'm going to clean my room right now.
Have you ever had the satisfaction of scratching an itch you couldn't quite get to before? He asked, as a gun shook in his nervous and sweaty hands. The sweat poured into his eyes, making vision questionable. He had a gun pointed at the pharmacist, but it wasn't loaded. He wanted to say, the evaluation from finally quenching a burning desire within yourself that you couldn't quite explain to others. Not fully anyway. The pharmacist just stared, hands raised, eyes bulging with fear, as he waited to see what this lunatic with a gun wanted. That feeling went away, and I want it back. About 6 months ago, he had a doctor thinking he had a combination of severe eczema, athlete's foot, as well as poison ivy. I would say a combined nightmare for hell indeed. Confused, his doctor tried everything. Every allergy pill, cream, lotion, and shot he could think of. No results. Finally, after 4 months of agony, he found something that worked and was in heaven. He could finally sleep. No more tossing and turning from constant scratching and irritated skin. He could shower normally again and wear clothes too. This relief was short-lived, however, as once the prescription ran out, his doctor refused to fill it again, but gave him instead the name of a doctor better suited for his needs. A psychologist. I'm going to see a fucking shrink. He went to every doctor in town, same story, same mumble about the referral and something and blah blah blah. At one doctor's office, he had overheard someone in saying something about a note in my chart that had been very public knowledge to any doctor or office wishing to look him up. He didn't know what it said, but he knew it probably wasn't good and definitely a reason for his prescription from the gods going unfilled. So, here we are, you, me, my gun, and my prescription. He points the gun at the terrified pharmacist and says, "Fill it! Sure, man. Whatever you want." The armed man throws his bottle at the pharmacist and thinks this is it. He can finally be at peace again. The pharmacist looks at the bottle, the side note in his public chart, and looks at the gunman and says, "Sir, your chart notes say that the reason you can't get your prescription filled is because, well, it's not the right medicine, and only a referred doctor can provide the medicine you need to help you. But there's something else." The gunman looks confused, but still trying to prevent it, and yells, "What the fuck are you talking about? Fill it!" Finally, the pharmacist decides if this lunatic is going to kill him, he's going to do whatever it is to give him his meds or not. So he finally says, "Sir, do you know what a placebo is?" The gunman thinks for a second and says, Yeah, I think so. Why?" Hesitantly, the pharmacist says, They gave you a placebo and it worked. And your doctor has in bold lettering that you're in need of anti-hallucinogens. What you have here is a prescription for baby aspirin."
Finding dreams in my sleep is next to impossible now, but it wasn't always that way. One of my most memorable dreams happened when I was just a child, and it haunted me for a very long time. I have found little in my lifetime that could explain what I witnessed and experienced during that dream, but I still remember it as one of the worst nightmares I ever experienced. I have been forgetting many of the ones from the past, and I want to write this one down before I forget it. With that said, let's begin recalling this twisted night. I was awoken in the middle of the night, sweating and in tears. I was scared awake by the lightning and rain that stormed just outside my bedroom window. I glanced over at my alarm clock to gain a sense of what time it was. My clock showed 4:56 a.m. and further puzzled me as the sun hadn't broken and everything aside from the lightning outside was pitch dark. I looked around in the darkness, trying to stand up out of my bed and gain a better sense of my surroundings. But as soon as I walked over to my alarm clock to see if it was properly set, my mother rushed into my room without warning, slamming my bedroom door in the process. She reached over and grabbed me without hesitation. "Come on, Tim, we're gonna be late." I had no recollection of any set date or meeting. There was no school today, according to the alarm clock, and my mother's panic only further amplified my feelings of dread. I was forced to quickly dress in a pair of pants, slipped on some shoes, and put on my best jacket. My mother thought I was delaying her and called me out to hurry up. "Hurry up! We need to deliver this letter!" I ran to my mother's car without question and jumped into the back seat. We rode through the darkness and rain, the large droplets sounding off like beating hammers on the top of my mother's car. Every moment I was with her further added to my feelings of dread. We rode on, into the distance, past my neighborhood, past all the flickering streetlights, and past all of the businesses in my town. We rode on through the seemingly desolate town with no incident. The streetlights were out, so my mother rode on through them and through the storm. She kept muttering under her breath about the letter. Gotta get this letter out to them. I just have to. And only Tim can do it. We rode on, past the businesses and on toward the border of Mexico. The trees rose around us, as the water from the nearby river gave the growth sustenance and hid our surroundings from us. We drove on past the trees and made it to the border. An old man awaited us there and asked my mother for a passport. She immediately handed the document over to him, and he stamped the small booklet before handing it back to my mother. He asked my mother where we were going in Mexico. I knew very little Spanish then, but my mother's reply in Spanish only served to send a deep chill down my spine. We are going to send a letter to the Green Asylum. The guard understood and nodded his head in approval, but looked at me with a face you would only bestow upon someone who was about to perish. I began to panic and tried to climb out of the car, but my mother fought to keep me calm and under control. We drove on across the river and into Mexico as my tears began to streak more and more across my face. I didn't want to go there, after hearing the rumors of that place. I had only heard of such a place in rumors and legends, but anyone who was sent there never made it back. I looked to unlock the car door and unlock my seatbelt so I could get out, but my mother pulled the vehicle over and tied my hands together with a zip tie to the door. As much as I fought my bonds and fought my mother with words, I wasn't going anywhere but with her. After a short drive down a long and muddy road through more ever-rising trees, we finally arrived at what my mother called El Verde Asilo, or the Green Asylum. The asylum loomed over us, an old Spanish prison that was outfitted to take asylum patients. The building itself appeared to be very old and lacked any proper care. With vines lining the sides of the building, it almost resembled a castle from another world, in another time. It appeared lifeless from the outside, no lights or other indications of anyone inside. The walls of the asylum were cracked and showed their age. My mother rolled down the window and unlocked my door. In her hand was the letter she wanted me to deliver, and handed it to me. Take this letter to the front door and slide it under the door. I looked back at my mother, my nerves preventing me from moving. What happens when I give him the letter? My mother grew to a boiling fury and screamed at me, "Get out of the car! Now!" I stepped out of the car and slowly walked up to the asylum. I trudged along as I made my way to the door. My mother continued to scream at me from the car. "Watch out for the arms!" As my mother screamed this warning to me, a hand reached out to me from the bars of one of the windows. The arm looked diseased, and the person beyond the bar was screaming at me in Spanish. "Come here, boy! Come to me!" I flung my body up against the wall, inching my way slowly to the door, doing my best to avoid the outreaching arm. I waited for a few minutes as I watched the letter under the door. I breathed in an air of relief when I saw the letter was taken by someone beyond the door. I finally felt a sense of relief and slowly started to walk back toward my mother's vehicle, but as I looked up, I saw my mother driving away. I screamed at her not to leave me. I began to run, screaming at her, hoping she would hear me, but before I was able to make it to the dirt road, I felt a hand wrap around my waist and the same arm that reached out to me, covering my mouth, stifling my shrieks of terror and cries for help. No matter how much I struggled, my captor had me clasped in their grip. No amount of struggling would free me. I was dragged into the asylum by my captors and was thrown quickly into a wooden chair. Leather straps were bound to me and the doors slowly closed on me as I screamed in horror, begging for someone. Anyone. But my vision was quickly cut off by a blindfold to my eyes and a large slam to my head. I was part of the asylum now, and they weren't planning on letting me go. This dream is one of the last few I remember from my childhood. The main reason I remember it so well is because it was the worst night terror I ever experienced. The effects of the dream forced me awake, screaming, and caused my body to instinctively run directly off of my bed and into the inner walls of my closet as I broke the doors that were in my way. I have never experienced a dream as terrifying as that one, and I hope I never experience a night terror like that again, but I feel this is probably the one dream I will never forget, no matter how many more years I continue not to experience any dreams.
Candy corn, a delicious candy treat found in just about every store around Halloween. I have a hard time eating it, and I'll tell you why. Once upon a time, there was a sweet old lady. She lived on a large farm with bountiful crops. Unfortunately, before anything could happen, her elderly husband passed away, and all of her children lived far away and could not help harvest the crops either. She knew she could not possibly harvest it all alone, so she devised a plan. She would hire her children to pick the corn, but she knew the children would not willingly just help her without receiving something in return, and the sweet old lady did not have any money to pay them until after the crops were harvested and then sold. So she devised to tell the children that the corn was special and that it wasn't really corn at all. This was actually candy. So she knew if any of the children tasted the candy, they would say she was lying and refuse to help her. So she told them they must eat the corn because it wouldn't turn into candy until midnight on Hallows Eve. If they ate it before then, it would just taste like regular corn, and they would become also cursed, never again tasting the sweetness of candy again. Her plan worked, and the neighboring children her help all right away. Feeling victorious, she went to the freshly picked corn, picked out a few ears, and cooked it with her supper, and eventually sat down to eat the meal she had prepared. As she sunk her teeth into the corn, she screeched in pain. Clenching her mouth, she dropped her corn into her plate and saw that her mouth was bleeding. She then felt something in her mouth and heard it clink into the plate. When she thought was corn, wasn't corn at all. It was rock hard candy.